When I was called to the telephone on February 17, 1943, to speak to the Army Personnel Office, I had no idea of what lay ahead of me. Only a week before, having recovered from my heart complaint, I had been to see General Bodwin Keitel, the head of the Personnel Office, to find out about the general situation and one or two individuals. Judging by what he had then said to me, there could be no question of my re-employment. Rather the contrary. Now General Lenars, Keitel's assistant, informed me that I was to report directly to the Führer in Vinitsa. He could not give me a reason for this summons, but it was plain to me that only the direst necessity would have driven Hitler to take such a step. Stalingrad, the unheard-of surrender of a whole army on the field of battle, the heavy casualties that resulted from this national catastrophe, the cruel defeats suffered by our allies, who had not proved capable of holding their fronts on either side of the destroyed Sixth Army with the limited means at their disposal, all this had led to a grave crisis. Morale had reached a low point both in the army and the country. External and internal political blows now aggravated the situation. After landing in North Africa, the Western powers had made rapid progress. The growing importance of this theater of war was underlined by the meeting of Roosevelt and Churchill in Casablanca from January 14th to the 23rd, 1943. For us, the most important result of this conference was the insistence that the Axis powers surrender unconditionally. The effect of this brutal formula on the German nation, and above all on the army, was great. The soldiers, at least, were convinced from now on that our enemies had decided on the utter destruction of Germany, that they were no longer fighting, as Allied propaganda at the time alleged, against Hitler and so-called Nazism, but against their efficient and therefore dangerous rivals for the trade of the world. For some time the architects of the destructive dogma of Casablanca boasted of what they had done. On February 11, 1943, Winston Churchill said in the House of Commons, "It is only after full and cold, sober and mature consideration of these facts, on which our lives and liberties certainly depend, that the President, with my full concurrence as agent of the War Cabinet, decided that the note of the Casablanca Conference should be the unconditional surrender of all our foes. Our inflexible insistence upon unconditional surrender does not mean that we shall stain our victorious arms by any cruel treatment of whole populations." Less than 2 years after making this speech, on December 15th, 1944, to be exact, Winston Churchill promised the Poles East Prussia, with the exception of Königsberg, which was to go to the Russians, Danzig, and 200 miles of the Baltic coast, adding that they were free to extend their territory at the expense of Germany to the west. He then declared the transference of several millions of people would have to be effected from the east to the west or north, and the expulsion of the Germans, because that is what is proposed, the total expulsion of Germans from the area to be acquired by Poland in the west or north. There will be no mixture of populations. Was it not atrocious so to treat the population of eastern Germany? Was it not unjust? The House of Commons was obviously not unanimous in its approval of Churchill's policy, for he felt compelled to justify himself once again on February 24, 1945, saying, "What, for instance, should be our attitude towards the terrible foe with whom we are grappling? Should it be unconditional surrender, or should we make some accommodation with them for a negotiated peace, leaving them free to regather their strength for a renewal of the struggle after a few uneasy years?" The principle of unconditional surrender was proclaimed by the President of the United States at Casablanca, and I endorsed it there and then on behalf of this country. I am sure it was right at the time it was used, when many things hung in the balance against us, which are decided in our favor now. Should we then modify this declaration, which was made in the days of our comparative weakness and lack of success, now that we have reached the period of mastery and power? I am clear that nothing should induce us to abandon the principle of unconditional surrender and enter into any form of negotiation with Germany or Japan, under whatever guise such suggestions may present themselves, until the act of unconditional surrender has been formally executed.